And let me go ahead and so it's my delight to welcome all of you to this webinar. This is our Sustainable Activism webinar, and my name is Lisa Levinson. I work with In Defense of Animals on this campaign, which we have to offer emotional and spiritual tools for animal activists. And we feature different speakers who are experts in their field of activist wellness and self-care. And today we are featuring therapist Gillian Walters. So I'm going to read a little bit more about her so you can get to know her too. So Gillian is a registered clinical counselor with a Master of Arts degree in counseling psychology. She has over 10 years of postgraduate training in expressive arts therapy and is the author and illustrator of 2 children's books, King Zoom and The Great Seal Pup Rescue. And also King Zoom, the Vegan Kid, Animals Used for Food. Gillian co-founded the first vegan magazine in British Columbia, the BC Vegan Magazine, and she is an international speaker on the topics of vegan children, intersectionality, dairy oppression, and activist trauma. You can find out more about Gillian on her website, which is gillianmeghanwalters.com, and I will put that link in the chat box so you guys can connect with her as well there. So Gillian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really good. How are you?
Good, I'm good too. I'm so delighted that you're here. It's really quite a
Yeah, me
treat.
too.
So,
Yeah.
and also want to thank everybody else for joining us. I know now there's just so much going on with online programming these days, and you could choose to be anywhere, and we're just so grateful that you've chosen to be with us today. And we've got so much to share, and I'm very excited. I have one of Gillian's books that I've been looking over, and I'm just so impressed with all that you do, Gillian.
Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Yeah.
It's a
Well,
pleasure to be here.
yes, yes, it is really special. And I know that you have some slides that you want to share with us today, and so I'll let you begin to maneuver that, and then we'll
Okay.
get started.
Okay. I'll see what I can do here.
Meanwhile, I'll put your website into the chat.
Thanks. So, Lisa, do I press share?
That's the one. Sometimes there's a little lag time. Everything seems to take a tiny bit of time. And if there might be a button, once you press share, that you press a little bit again to get it started.
Uh-oh. It says it can't connect. But I see it.
You know, I wonder if it's the Zoom, only because we weren't able to do the live, and maybe they're just having some issues with their platform. Could be. Well, if you see it, you could try to share it. If it doesn't come up on everyone's screen, then what you could do is just, you might see it, but we may not see it.
Because I remember it worked the other day.
Yes, I know we did a practice and everything. Of course, always goes well on those practices.
I know.
Yeah, let me just check to see if it looks like, I'm just gonna see if it looks like the share screen. Looks like it might be working on my end here, but I don't know if it's working on your end. So, let's see. Well, if you'd like, you can begin with the...
Let me see if this is working.
Oh, okay.
I pressed the wrong share button.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Something's happening.
Yay.
Great. Oh, wow. Wonderful.
Okay, do you see that?
I do.
Okay, good.
We can see your slides, and that I think everyone else can too. So
Okay,
thank you
cool.
so much.
Okay, great. We can get started then.
Fabulous.
So thanks everybody who's joined us today for Trauma and Self-Care, Cultivating Activists and Community Resiliency. Thank you to Lisa for having me on today. And I wanted to say that I had originally designed this as a 3-hour workshop, and I was going to be giving it to people in the community starting at the end of March, beginning of April. And I was going to have participants embody the concepts through art, movement, and collaborative discussion. And then the world changed. So as vegan animal activists, we carry the burden of knowing. With a deep understanding, we know that this has not been the first, nor will it be the last pandemic if society and the corporations who fund animal agriculture do not stop exploiting animals. Our usual activities as activists have been put on hold, and we have been forced to get creative. And this is a good thing. My hope is that activists and communities can take this time to assess our trauma exposure responses and begin implementing a much needed self-care. So thank you everybody who, like Lisa said, took the time to join us tonight. So for the next hour, I'll just give you a little rundown for the program. We'll start with an introduction, grounding meditation. We'll look at what trauma is, primary trauma, intergenerational trauma, trauma exposure response, understanding trauma specifically to the vegan animal activist, look at resilience, self-care, and mindfulness, discuss how we can maintain resiliency as a movement. We'll end with a moment of silence and then a call to action. And if there's time afterwards, please feel free to ask questions. So in the last 10 years, I became very interested in the effects of trauma on the vegan animal activist and the impact that burnout has on the sustainability of our movement. When I decided that I would become active in the movement, the only trauma I ever thought about was that of the animals. Even though I'd spent decades studying human trauma and working through my own personal traumas, I, like many other activists, developed the mantra, but the animals have it worse. I was so focused on the animals that I lost focus on my own self-care, and I was burning out. So that's kind of what led me to this moment to present this today. My therapeutic philosophy is that we all possess the innate wisdom to heal. Often because of trauma, we have lost that connection to the spiritual place inside of us, that healing place that we all have. My hope is that through education, awareness, and action, we can become resilient activists, and that ripple effect will create safe, inclusive communities and sustain our movement. So I'm just going to start with a grounding meditation. And depending where you are, if you're sitting or you're standing, I just want you to just feel those feet on the ground. You might want to stamp them on the ground so you can hear them. Just breathe normally. Feel your body relaxing as you pay attention to it. You can have your hands, just lay them on your lap or by your side if you're standing. Again, just breathe normally and feel your face, muscles in your face relax. So you're releasing the tension, and your arms and shoulders relax as well. So we're going to take a deep breath in. And exhale. And your eyes can be closed or open depending on how you feel. And we're going to do this 2 more times. So take a breath in. And exhale. Now, if you have a favorite tree, I know I have a favorite tree, just think of that tree as you're feeling your feet on the ground. Take another deep breath in and exhale. So we're going to use that tree visualization at the end of our session today. So let's look at what is trauma. So trauma is the term used to describe the challenging emotional consequences that living through a distressing event can have on an individual. Trauma is about the loss of connection to ourselves, to others, and the world around us. What may be traumatic to one person may not be traumatic to another. So primary trauma is usually defined as a single event. It could be childhood abuse, relationship abuse, an assault, violence of any kind, repeated exposure to violence, a sudden loss of a loved one, living through an earthquake or a flood or wildfires. It could be experiencing a terrorist attack or military combat. Historical and intergenerational trauma. Historical trauma refers to emotional and psychological wounds passed down from one generation to another. So African slavery descendants and North American Indigenous peoples are examples of communities who continue to be oppressed by institutional racism, higher rates of poverty, addiction, violence, suicide, and incarceration. So you may have heard of burnout, compassion fatigue, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma. These are all words that are used to describe the effects of witnessing others' trauma. And I like Laura van der Noot-Lipsky's definition of trauma exposure response, which includes witnessing trauma from other living beings. So her definition is: a trauma exposure response may be defined as the transformation that takes place within us as a result of exposure to the suffering of other living beings or the planet. And what kind of symptoms are related to trauma exposure response? You may be feeling hopeless or helpless. You may have a sense that that one can never do enough. You may be hypervigilant. Your creativity may be diminished. You may start to minimize your symptoms. You may feel chronically exhausted. You may start to have physical ailments. You may be irritable and inability to listen. You may deliberately avoid talking about stuff. You may have dissociative moments. You may have feelings of fear, guilt, anger. You may turn towards alcohol and drugs to numb the feelings. You may start to have an inability to empathize or have an inflated sense of importance related to one's work. So trauma is cumulative. So think of a boiling kettle, and we'll return to that at the end. So understanding trauma and the vegan animal activist. So there's something really unique, I think, about the vegan animal activist, and I'm going to try break it down for you. So you may have heard of the term dystopia by Claire Mann. It's quite a mouthful, but it goes: the existential crisis experienced by vegans arising out of an awareness of the trance-like collusion with a dystopian world and the awareness of the greed, ubiquitous animal exploitation, and speciesism in a modern dystopia. It's it's a mouthful, but I'll break it down. And I don't know if anybody's read her book, but just having that word to describe how I was feeling was really comforting. I felt like, oh my God, I'm not the only one. She was able to put all this together. So when you think about yourself and when you first became a vegan, an ethical vegan, you come to this awareness that you have this burden of knowing. You know the extent of animal exploitation, which can lead to distress, overwhelming feelings, grief, despair, disbelief. When you talk to coworkers or family or friends or even your partner about this newfound awareness, they're not always, they don't always see it the way you see it. So they may ridicule you or criticize or get angry. And that can be triggering, especially if you've had trauma in your past with your family and you bring up this and it causes some trauma there. Your social circle starts to change. So you can only really relate to vegans and unable to relate to non-vegans. And there's also this guilt from previous participation in animal exploitation. And there's a guilt that I'm never doing enough. There's so much suffering and I'm not doing enough. And then, whether this is before or after in the timeline, you decide to get active. We really are putting ourselves into traumatic situations. So bearing witness or protesting violence, we often see violence firsthand against animals, and often violence is targeted at activists, whether it's a truck driver trying to run somebody over, or people yelling at you or swearing at you or calling you names. If you're involved with disruptions or open rescue or undercover investigations, you often are taking a chance, you're risking your freedom. There's often encounters with police. There's also violence targeted towards activists. If you're researching or campaigning, social media is a constant scrolling of very violent imagery towards animals. And unless you filter things through, and if you're researching things, you're going to see a lot of that, as well as online bullying, which can be very, very violent towards activists. So just to kind of sum the activists, vegan animal activist trauma profile, when you're thinking about a vegan animal activist, think about this person, whoever they are, if it's you or if it's somebody else. We all come into the movement with our own personal trauma history. So whether we've had counseling, we've had therapy, or we haven't had therapy, or we've had a trauma and didn't know it was a trauma, we all have experience with this. And now we are putting ourselves in traumatic, we are putting ourselves there on purpose. And for a good cause, but we're still putting ourselves through very intense situations. And this person, whether they're this vegan animal activist, whether it's you or somebody else, and whether you're working in a community or by yourself, whether you're paid or not paid, is this community making self-care a priority? Because if they're not, that's going to affect your whole experience. Is it a safe space? That's also going to affect your whole experience. And also we need to think of, is this vegan animal activist affected by colonialism, racism, sexism, ageism, ableism? That all will play a role in your trauma response. Just going to grab some water here. So whether you're volunteering or you're a paid animal activist, your societal worth is less than other first responders. So society does not view us, our actions or our beliefs with the same empathy as somebody, for example, that's rescuing a cat from a burning building. Well, you probably think of somebody that's not a vegan animal activist would see this on the news and be very heartwarming, right? I wonder how they would feel about this. Activist rescues piglet from slaughterhouse. Actually, they probably wouldn't have said rescued in the media. They probably would have said stolen or something. But you see, so not only do we have all those other factors involved in our trauma, we also have the society's view of us. So how can we build resilience? As vegan animal activists, we are in a unique situation in that we are surrounded by trauma 24/7. The burden of knowing never leaves, and we are constantly reminded of the cruelty or suffering. For example, a trip to the grocery store. So how do we build resilience, and what is resilience? Well, resilience is the ability to manage difficult or traumatic experiences without long-term negative effects. It's the ability to rebound to resource states after an overwhelming experience. Like tending to a garden, it takes time and commitment. I'd like to underline that. It really takes time and commitment. So we have to make self-care a priority. That means putting on the oxygen mask first. And that brings me back to that mantra, or that sense that this is for the animals. They're suffering way worse than we are, which is true. But the fact is, if we don't take care of ourselves, we are not going to be there for the animals. So I would just like to a little revision of that mantra. So back to the boiling kettle. If left unattended, it will steam, whistle, and eventually boil dry. So self-care. The practice of taking an active role in the preservation and improvement of one's emotional, physical, and spiritual needs. So we often think of self-care as eating healthy, getting enough sleep, exercising, laughing, being around supportive people, maybe writing a gratitude journal, which is all very, very important, and it is the foundation of self-care. But when it comes to resiliency, specifically for vegan animal activists, we need to start by acknowledging our own trauma histories, and be willing to seek professional help, because no matter if we acknowledge them or not, we will be reminded of them at some point during our activism. It will ignite something. So number 2, cultivate a sense of awareness around your current exposure to trauma. So kind of take stock of what you're being involved in, whether it's your time on social media, bearing witness, research. Just think of all those things, maybe make a list, and how I'm being impacted by each one of these. Practice mindfulness daily, even for a few minutes to start. That's so cliche, but it's really even a minute, even 30 seconds, like just remembering to breathe is very important, and it's a good start. And find balance. Incorporate other joyful activities into your life, something that doesn't involve activism. Mindfulness works, yes. So mindfulness is about being still and listening to the inner wisdom we already possess. As activists, especially if you really get into we're on this treadmill of, just there's so much to do and very little population of us doing it, that we feel we need to do so much. And if we could just take the time just to stop the wheels and just be mindful about our breath and our participation in everything. If we just slow down, I think we'll be a lot healthier as a movement. So we can incorporate mindfulness into our activist actions as well, so that we remain peaceful in our tone and our action. Mindfulness will help, but it will also, if we've been numbing our feelings for a long time, it's also going to open up that. So be prepared. If you're taking some time to be mindful, some stuff will eventually come up. That's when it's good to I've talked to a supportive friend, maybe read up on mindfulness, or I was going to say take a mindfulness class, maybe if there's one online, or something, counseling would help, and you can also do that online. And talking about numbing our feelings, I think we do this a lot in our actions, especially if we're looking at violence in animals. I just love this quote. It's by Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky. You don't get to selectively numb. So if you're going to numb out your sorrow, you're also going to numb out any possible happiness you have. If you're going to numb out the heartbreak, you're going to numb out any ability to survive noticing what is beautiful. So burnout, that's just an overall term for everything. You may think that the biggest threat to our movement is the systems that oppress animals. It's not. Burnout is the biggest threat to the animal liberation movement, because without us, without our healthy bodies working against these systems, you know, it's not going to happen. So how do we cultivate resiliency in our communities? And I'm just going to touch on this. It could really be another webinar, but racism, sexism, and infighting have been documented as key factors in complete withdrawal from the movement. And I think anybody that's been involved in the movement for any period of time knows that this to be true. I think everybody knows somebody that has left because of one of these reasons. And the reason is racism and sexism often get dismissed by the dominant white privileged animal rights culture as an issue not belonging in the animal rights movement. We hear things like, we are here for the animals, they have their own movement, they have their own movements. And the reality is, unless we understand the oppression of humans and animals and the interconnectedness of both, our movement will not succeed. Unless we can collaborate with other movements, the animal rights movement will not succeed. So where do we start with that? If you're somebody from the dominant culture, we listen. We listen. Just like veganism, that is about unfolding layers upon layers of deceit by oppressive systems, exploiting animals, so is human oppression. So if you're like me and grew up in the dominant culture, it takes a real openness and a willingness to hear others and to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it's not comfortable. But it's definitely what we need. So like veganism, it is relearning what we thought we knew about the world. So how can we sustain our movement? I think we need to become trauma informed. So hopefully what I've talked about today, kind of identify our own trauma histories, recognizing what that looks like for other people, and approaching other people with curiosity instead of judgment. Acknowledge that we all carry our own trauma histories, and that historical traumas of colonization, racism, and structural violence are real and can intensify an individual's trauma response. Approach others in our community with curiosity instead of judgment. Place self-care as a top priority in your organizations and communities. No shame. Set aside time in meetings to discuss the effects of the trauma that we have just experienced, and again, no shame. Remember that a trauma response exposure is totally normal. There's no blame and no judgment and no shaming. And if you're going through a difficult time, and I know this is a very difficult time for everybody, I ask that you look at your own history and go back in your own history and think, you know, when was a time that I was really suffering and I made it through? Sometimes we forget about how strong we really are, and ask yourself, you know, how did I manage to get through that? And then that might give you some idea of what you can use as your self-care toolkit. Find strength in the history of your ancestors. So ask your ancestors, how did they get through their struggles? How did they get through traumatic events? So we're just coming to the close of the webinar, and I'm just going to take maybe a minute to do just a moment of silence. And we started out, I asked if you had a favorite tree. And if you want to, just remember that tree and get in a position that you feel comfortable with. You can stand like a tree, you can sit like a tree, and get those feet, stomp them onto the floor if you want, and get them, feel the ground, feel the earth beneath you. And just breathe normally. And feel that trunk of your tree, how strong it is. So even if there's a wind or there's a strong rain shower, you're still standing. You're wavering maybe, but you're still standing, because those roots, those feet, those roots are really attached to the center of yourself. So just soften your shoulders again, those tree limbs. Soften your face muscles. You can close your eyes or you can look down. Whatever you're comfortable with. And just take another deep breath in. And exhale. And just know that you can always count on that tree. You can always take time to feel your feet on the ground. Remember that. If you're feeling stressed or anxious, remember that tree, your favorite tree, and get connected to the ground there. Remember that you are strong and that no matter what comes at you, you can find that inner strength within you. So we'll just do one more deep breath. And exhale. So I'm just going to end with a call to action. And I'm going to ask anybody, I don't know how many people are watching, but if anything resonated with you during this webinar, and ask yourself what I can do right now, like tonight, to practice self-care. It could be something you used to do, something new that you thought of. And also, what could you do as a member in the animal liberation community to create safety and build resilience in the movement? I think, Lisa, maybe they can, hi.
Hello.
Can they type something if they want?
Sure, yeah, they can type it right into the chat box,
Mm-hmm.
everyone who's joined us. And also, if you have any questions for Gillian, in a minute or two, we'll open up for a Q&A, and you can type any questions, or there's even a function on the Zoom called Q&A where you can click raise hands. That's another way. Either way, we can definitely answer your questions.
Oops. Okay.
Thank you, Gillian, for sharing that
You're welcome.
wonderful webinar with all that content, but also just the practices. I think that's so key that you began and ended with a meditative practice. It's something that we can actually do in our daily lives. And we got an experience of that type of deep calmness during the webinar today.
Yeah.
Tony Parker, she added something to your question. She said that she's thinking that we can even give small donations to help sanctuaries at this time. That might be a call to action.
Yeah. Yeah. Good one.
Yeah, and let me see here in the Q&A, there might be, so Rebecca says that would this in a shortened form be good to do before each activist event? Like to actually do the type of grounding exercise that we did?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And you can experiment with different, you can do the tree because it symbolizes strength, right? And strength and also growth, because trees grow. So no matter what you're going through, you're growing.
Nice. And there's also Laura has a question. She's saying that she feels burnt out already. And how long
Mm-hmm.
does burnout usually last? She says it's been months and it feels terrible not having any motivation for activism anymore.
Yeah, yeah. And that's what happens. And I can't say how long it's going to last, because I think we need to, if it's been going on that long, pull back and take that time. I think it's a perfect opportunity right now to really focus on yourself, because you will get back out there. I'm sure of it. It's just a matter of coming back to yourself and finding that strength within yourself and building that resiliency. But yeah, that's what happens. It's hard. It's a unique situation, I think, when you think of other first responders, like I said, and the animal activist. It's very unique.
And also, we have another question. Candace is asking that about the webinars that you mentioned in the beginning. Will there be any more like this? She's very interested.
Sure. I'd love to do more. Yeah. I don't have anything set up, but I would like to do some more.
So
Mm-hmm.
probably a good way for anyone who's joined us on the webinar. We have a good number of people. We have about 20 people who've joined us
Mm-hmm.
today, which is wonderful. And
Great.
Gillian, you can share your, maybe we've gotten your website that we've put up, and if you want to share
Mm-hmm.
your email address, that might be a
Yeah.
good way for people to stay in touch with you. They can
Mm-hmm.
reach out to you, such as Candace, you might reach out to her
Mm-hmm.
individually and let Gillian know that you're interested. That's one way
Mm-hmm.
to stay connected.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah. So do you
definitely.
want to say your, also we have some people on the phone. So if you don't mind just
Okay.
saying your email out loud and I'll type it into the chat box.
Yeah, it's just my name, Gillian Meghan Walters at gmail.com.
So Gillian and then Megan is MEGGJN
HAN.
and then WALTERS for those people on the phone at Gmail.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So that way people can stay connected. They can find out about other workshops that you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many. You could really tease a lot of this out and make it more in depth for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, does anyone else who's joined us today have a question? You're welcome to go ahead and type that into the chat box there, or you can do it on the Q&A. It looks like we might have another one here. So here's a question from Aoi, and he asks, if we notice someone who may be going down a path that we considered counterproductive or otherwise likely to result in burnout, then how um, to recommend or suggest alternatives? What should we do as a friend?
Mm-hmm. I think as a friend, we need to embody self-care ourselves, and that if we embody it ourselves, it takes the shame away from it, so we can be role models for other people. And just acknowledging that this is a true thing. This happens, and it's totally normal, and it's not something to be ashamed of. It's going to happen eventually when you get into animal activism. Even if you think you're super resilient, it takes, like I said about the garden, it takes practice, like an everyday thing.
Mm. And I like the way you mentioned to do some kind of mindfulness practice in the beginning of the day. even
Mm-hmm.
if it's 30 seconds or 1 minute
Yeah.
or even 5 minutes of doing meditation or breathing, because that small investment over time really builds and it fertilizes the soil around your tree so that you can be resilient, and it can also just help how you feel on a daily basis.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, and we have another question. This is so Rebecca's asking, she says, is increased frustration with church members for not going vegan a sign of burnout, or is that just natural frustration?
Yeah, it's natural frustration, but it is, I would say, a symptom. Like it could lead to burnout if all these, I guess it's depending on your reaction to that frustration. So if that frustration is really getting you down and you're kind of fighting against it all the time, then it will eventually lead to burnout.
Mhm. So preparing when you're having these conversations for
Mm-hmm.
this, being able
Yeah.
to um, be kind of have a way of being objective, being able to approach people with the idea that we're not in control of what happens
Mm-hmm.
and that you're a messenger just offering this up, and whomever is really motivated or interested, they will take it in. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes we don't know what happens in that moment. Lots of people who, even the person I think who started vegan outreach, I remember him saying that he never knew if it was having an effect, and yet he handed out millions of these
Yeah.
brochures, and it did have an impact on many people, but often we don't
Mm-hmm.
know, and so there's this
Right.
this acceptance of the mystery and the unknown as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have another question too. Tessa says, thank you so much. She says that everything that you said, Gillian, resonates entirely with her. In
Oh,
addition to
awesome.
everyday trauma, when seeing dead bodies of animals on the shelves in the store, she also rescues abandoned dogs and cats. And many times she rescues them from horrible circumstances. And she finds it additionally stressful and traumatic. Do you have any tips on how to cope with um, as how to cope with this, with related to self-care, especially with self-care being limited? Like if you have a home full of rescued cats and
Mm-hmm.
dogs and you're constantly tending to them, how do you tend to yourself?
Mm-hmm. It sounds cliche, but you just have to make the time. Like you said, even if it's for 30 seconds a day, it's just a matter of telling yourself like you need it. You need it to survive. You need it to keep helping these animals. You need to be healthy yourself. So
Yeah. So I've heard some people talk about it as a non-negotiable. So what do you
yeah.
do as a non-negotiable? Like you get up and you do your 1 minute meditation or 1 minute chakra breathing, or you do sit outside in nature and just listen to the sounds of nature for two
Mm-hmm.
minutes. Whatever is your whatever you're committing to, whatever is your practice, your
Mm-hmm.
non-negotiable. Maybe it's stretching, doing a little stretching.
Yeah. It's funny because, we brush our teeth every morning and we brush our teeth before we go to bed. And so why can't we take 1 minute to breathe, like to sit with ourselves and just listen? It's just about implementing that into the routine of the day. And once you get started, it'll be way more easier. It's just about getting started.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. That's so true. These basic hygiene things that we do that we think of as necessities,
Mm-hmm.
well, deep breathing is a necessity too,
Mm-hmm.
and grounding ourselves is a necessity. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that if I do one small thing for myself, then I'm so much more joyful when I'm doing things for others, whether they're animals or people. And
Mm-hmm.
it really helps me to say, well, I've given myself that 5 minutes of breathing, and now I'm all yours, Chico. I tell my cat, whatever you
Yeah.
want, I'm here. I can, I'll be of service.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. It looks like we have some more messages for you. So, um, So one is, and this is something that does come up within activist communities. Um, so first of all, this is from Scott, and he is thanking you for highlighting the isms
Oh,
that are prevalent in the animal liberation movement. And from his experience, it has changed and damaged his local animal rights activism community and experience.
mhm.
So the movement has fallen into like an echo chamber. It is one of the only movements that doesn't embrace and understand the interconnectedness of all oppression. So thank you for bringing light into this dark place.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know if you have any ideas or suggestions for people how to, when they experience this in their activist communities.
Mhm. Yeah. First of all, you're not alone, and it's happening. I've talked to many activists across the world, and it's happening everywhere. And I think if you're on social media at all, you will notice that. So it's something that we need to be, if you're already aware of it, maybe join communities that are already working with the isms and try to bring that into your activist spaces.
That's good. So opening the dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
getting people to start thinking about it, even calling people out if you notice a comment
Yeah,
or something that doesn't seem appropriate. I
yes,
mean, we're hearing a lot of comments going on in the United States with the president currently making all kinds of comments that are really just offensive to
yeah.
many groups of people. So that's an example of how do we then, call them out, call out the president,
Mm-hmm.
call out people in our groups who are saying things
Mm-hmm.
that don't feel right to you. Like if you're in
Mm-hmm.
that conversation and you start to get an icky feeling inside, like that doesn't feel right, that's the moment. Those
Yeah.
feelings are guiding you towards saying something. Like that's the
Mm-hmm.
moment when you can just say, that doesn't really sit well with me, or I'm uncomfortable with that comment,
Mm-hmm.
and then start to be curious about why the person was saying that, or why you feel those sensations of discomfort.
Yeah. And most of the time, you're probably not the only one feeling discomfort. There's probably a lot of people in the room, and it's like, who's going to say something, right? So it's
Mhm.
being a little bit courageous to feel uncomfortable.
Yes, that's so true. As soon as you speak up, other people, they're just going to
Yeah.
feel a sense of relief, like, wow, we were
Mm-hmm.
wondering who was going to say this. And once you
Mm-hmm.
do, then you can open up the dialogue, and you'll find that there are many people who really resonate with your comments.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, so let's see, some people, we've got a few more comments here. Um, some good books recommended, such as Dystopia that you mentioned earlier, Gillian. And we've actually done a webinar with Claire Mann as
Oh,
well about
okay.
her book. So we have that. All of the webinars that we do with the activists, we have on a playlist called Sustainable Activism Webinars. And you can
Mm-hmm.
search for that on YouTube and then go back and find some of your favorite authors actually there. And it looks
My new
like,
favorite book is
yes.
Coe's zoological. Can't remember the title, but it's my new favorite book.
Ooh, that sounds great.
Zoological. Yeah, I'll
You
type
know,
it in later
yeah,
whenever.
yeah, you could type it in. The other thing you could do
Mhm,
is any resources that you want to share with this group
mhm,
here, please just send them to me, and I'm going to
mhm.
put together a replay link for this group, and it will be ready tomorrow. And then I'll send in any resources along with that. So you'll get an email with
Okay.
this ability to see this again, and also with any new resources that Jillian sends. So another person, looks like Scott is recommending Aphorisms as
Yeah.
another great book.
Yeah.
And let's see. So a couple more comments. One of them is, what if you're the only vegan in the home? How to handle that?
Yeah. Whew, that's a tough one. And I guess it depends if your other members are accepting or not, or tolerant or not. But I would say trying to find community, like-minded community, other vegans or activists that you hang out with that can help support you.
That's great. That's really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And also, if you are the only vegan in your household, maybe establishing some ground rules about some things. If you have certain boundaries that will help you feel, safe and welcome in the home, offering an opportunity to talk about those things
Yeah.
and seeing if there's maybe something that you can work out with your housemates.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's another comment here from Anita, who's saying that she went through a traumatic period, that what really helped her to embrace the pain of the feelings is not to fight it, just to let it go
Yeah.
as it comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
Just like the breath, it comes and it goes,
Mm-hmm.
almost like when you get those
Mm-hmm.
feelings, you take in that breath and then know that as you exhale, they're going to leave too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, so let's see here. There's one, it seems like this is a comment here. Beasts of Burden, Animal and
Yeah.
Disability Liberation. I think that's a book.
Yeah. It's a
Anim-
good book.
Great. Fabulous. Wow, we're getting so many great recommendations. This is terrific. Yeah. Just looking to see there's any other, looks like there might be a couple other questions here. So one is that we sometimes this is from Awi, we sometimes overplay the odds of success of various campaigns towards getting activists excited, but this often results in frustrations when success does not come about. How to get activists excited without conveying dishonest expectations?
Yeah, that's a good one. Um, be honest. Be honest that campaigns usually take, if you look at the history of campaigns, it doesn't happen overnight, and it's a long, hard struggle, and it takes a long time. So maybe looking at our history and the kind of campaigns that have succeeded and what people went through to get success from them.
Great, thank you. We do have a wealth of information from
Mm-hmm.
the past that we can benefit
Mm-hmm.
from for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
we have another question comment from Tony. And she says, how do we get the media to discuss the issue of what is happening with factory farming, meaning the mainstream media? Uh, and it's, of course, talking about the virus, coronavirus. But at some point, how do we get the media to discuss these issues related to factory farming? She says she's frustrated because nobody is talking about animal issues except people
Mm-hmm.
who are in the animal activist movement.
Yeah. I wish I had the answer to that. Yeah, I've dealt with media in the past just with doing actions, and it's not their number one priority. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
That is a good question, Tony. And I think someone like Jane Unchained, Jane Velez Mitchell, who's been working on this, she's created her own media
Yeah.
network just to cover these issues because the mainstream media is not too responsive.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so this is a great question and maybe something
Yeah.
for more of a communications type of person. Um, Often, I know PETA has some different ideas they try just to catch us and catch the media off guard so that we'll pay
Mm-hmm.
attention. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and I think a lot of health practitioners have also come out. So, for example, Dr. Neil Barnard has been making a lot of statements about what's
Mm-hmm.
been happening with this virus, and I think Dr. Michael Greger, for decades,
Mm-hmm.
has been lecturing on this topic of
Mm-hmm.
zoonotic diseases. And so, these are
Mm-hmm.
people who have quite a bit of notoriety, and they are resources for the media, and yet still we have some dissonance there with what is covered. So
Mm-hmm.
please, if anyone has any ideas or thoughts about this, put them in the chat box. Let's continue talking and
Mm-hmm.
strategizing about that. And it looks
Mhm.
like Nicole mentions, she says, sorry if this is off topic, but she's been considering to get her MA in counseling or PhD in psychology. Do you have any
Mhm.
recommendations or advice for an animal rights activist, specifically for becoming a counselor or a psychologist?
My only advice is follow your heart, no matter what. Just kind of take some time to meditate and think about that. Like ask yourself, what are things that pop up that you're really passionate about? And that might lead you in some different directions. But I don't know of any like programs specifically for animal activists. No.
So there are some programs where you can create your own curriculum, such as
Mm-hmm.
I think Antioch, they do, and I know that Gillian, you do expressive arts therapy. So
Yeah.
there's that field, expressive arts therapy tends to be a little more open-minded where you're able to
Mm-hmm.
create a curriculum. And Antioch has that. There's a campus, Naropa is a very
Yeah.
open-minded campus,
Yeah.
which is in Colorado. And I'm also an expressive arts therapist, and there's a place in San Diego that is that also has expressive arts therapy where you can get a PhD as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so those are some avenues to explore and
Mm-hmm.
to really see. Many of the programs allow you to create your own coursework, and in that view, you could really specialize in animal rights activism. There's also another program out there which is called, you become certified as a compassion fatigue therapist. And there's also something called a compassion fatigue educator. So there's a woman named Jessica Dulce or Dolce. She has
Mm-hmm.
she specializes in assisting people who work in the animal sheltering movement, who are like working at shelters, and
Mm-hmm.
she helps them with compassion fatigue, and she calls herself
Mm-hmm.
a compassion fatigue educator. So those
Okay.
are a couple of different programs that I've seen popping up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, an animal rights activist who specializes in this type of work is let's see, Jennifer Blau, and she's based in Michigan, but she also became a compassion fatigue therapist. And
Okay.
and the difference between the two, I think the therapist, you can go into really looking into what the past traumas and looking into the
Mm-hmm.
history of the past, whereas the educator is just helping with how to manage in the moment, and not so much delving into the traumas that Gillian brought up earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, another question here is, can you please list the doctors I can get different quotes from? Hmm. So this might have been related to talking about COVID-19. And in that case,
Okay.
yes, it's Dr. Neil Barnard. I can type his name in here. He started Physicians for Responsible Medicine. So you can also look that up if you don't remember his name. I'll go ahead and type his name in, and also um, Dr. Michael Greger. Uh, there you go. I'll put them in there. I'm not positive their names are spelled correctly, but I think they're close enough.
Mm-hmm.
So, very good. Well, let's see if there's any other questions here. Um, let's see. Yes, and also Tony Parker, who's here as well, has also written a book. Um, Tony, if you could type the name of it into the chat box, that would help, because I'm just trying to remember it now. Um, but it is a resource for self-care, being present.
Mm,
I think it's about the pillars of health, something along those lines.
okay.
So we'll look into that. If I can
Mm-hmm.
bring that, I'll put that into the resources that we send back to everyone.
Okay.
So I think we might have one more question. Any tips on repairing relationships between a few activists that have had harsh words online? That's a good
Yeah,
question.
that's meet in person. That's what I always say. Like, So it's so easy to go back and forth online. It's because you're behind a screen. I think we all know that. And to meet somebody in person, offer to meet them. Can I meet you for coffee and talk about it and just start there? That's would be my suggestion.
That's a great one because that takes out all of the extra um, confusion that happens online.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
Mm-hmm.
really good. If you're not able to do that, then maybe bringing in a mediator or somebody
Mm-hmm.
who is a therapist to help. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we have an animal activist support line within Defense of Animals, and we do have counselors there who can assist with mediation. So you can always check in with us. The website is idausa.org/activist support. And we have a phone number you can call. We also have email and text and online chat. And so we do also have a Facebook group, which is called Animal Activist Online Support Group, which is on Facebook. And there you can also ask questions, and there's counselors who monitor that as well. So there are resources out there.
Mm-hmm. That's a great resource. Yeah.
Yes, yes, it's a delight to share it. We created it especially for animal activists, and we actually get a
Mm-hmm.
lot of calls from people who are not activists, who have questions about their animals or concerned about something they've
Mm-hmm.
seen. But we really are there to serve animal activists for people who
Mm-hmm.
have questions. We also refer people to vegan therapists if they have
Mm-hmm.
ongoing counseling and therapy needs. So it's a wonderful resource, and I'll go
Mm-hmm.
ahead. Another thing is, if you're not aware of our events page, we also host these regular online events. So I'll just type a couple of those things in there so you can have them. idausa.org/events for the events, and then for the support, it's idausa.org activist support. Wonderful. Great. Well, thank you so much to everyone who's joined us.
Mm-hmm.
It's felt really intimate because we're
Yeah.
able to answer all these questions. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm really thrilled with your presentation, Gillian. I'm so
Oh,
grateful
thank
to
you.
you.
Oh, thanks. Thanks for allowing this to happen. It's great.
Yes, this is the
Yeah.
perfect time to do this when
Yeah.
we're here, we're really locked into our homes, and we're
Mm-hmm.
also having these anxieties about what is going on with the animals, with the world, with our
Mm-hmm.
relationships with others, that often they have moved online because we're not able to interact in person. So we're
Mm-hmm.
really dealing with a lot of different struggles in this time.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
we're getting some wonderful thank yous,
Oh.
people thanking you, and I can just echo that as well. Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joined us. This is really a
Yes.
very, it's a very sweet opportunity to be together and
Mm-hmm.
to look into what does it mean to be an activist and also to practice self-care.
Mm-hmm.
Um, oh, so one person also shared here that this person looks like gallery does the shopping for the household and buries their feelings while shopping,
Mm.
um, and went to delivery at times. It helps. So I think this was the question related to the vegan household. That is very tricky.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's really hard when we have to shop for others in our family. If they're not well and they're not having vegan food, it can be
Yeah.
so disheartening. Um,
Yeah.
I think that we really we're doing our part, and there are
Mm-hmm.
people who will relate to this journey that we're on, and they'll want to join in. And there are
Mm-hmm.
also some people who may not want to join in for their own personal reasons. And we're not in charge of everyone, although we can
Mm-hmm.
live by example, as Gillian mentioned. And those times are really challenging. So I think it's
Mm-hmm.
good to seek out support. I really do,
Yeah.
because um, it is important to honor your feelings as well, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
perhaps even consider, in the long run, maybe there's a way to find a different community that is vegan. There's actually on Facebook, there's a vegan household group. There are people who join together to create their own
Mm-hmm.
um, communities. And there's
Mm-hmm.
even one, I think, an actual community starting. I think this person is starting one in Missouri that's a vegan community. So there are places to go if you really want to find that kind of solidarity. And it is possible. I always think, wow, that's so amazing when somebody's family, their whole family goes vegan. I'm like, how lucky are they?
Yeah.
When many of us don't have that situation. We might be the
Mm-hmm.
only one in our family. And
Mm-hmm.
so, so that's why all these support communities are out there so that we can support one another. And just like you said, Gillian, really reaching out to other vegans, even if
Mm-hmm.
you're not living with them, being able
Yeah.
to connect and talk about these things.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah. So why don't we all take a nice deep breath together, breathing in and then exhaling fully, just letting that go through our feet, all the energy and just having a lot of gratitude. I feel a lot of
Mm-hmm.
gratitude for everyone here today. And I want to thank you and thanks to everyone again. And I hope you have a wonderful evening and that you'll be able to tune in to other events that we have online while we're here in social distancing land.
Yeah.
Well, take care and have a
Mm.
wonderful evening,
Okay.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.